Yeah.
for next time. Yeah. Fabulous. Well, welcome back. I'll hand over to Russ.
Thanks, Diane. And hi, everyone. We're covering natural phenomena tonight. So Adrian will be doing a lot of the talking tonight, providing some practitioners' perspectives on the stuff we'll be discussing. So I'll start sharing now because we've got a few introductory slides that we'll get out of the way while I'm talking. Just a couple of things. I'll post shortly a link to the folder where we've got the presentation slides. We've got more information to share with you tonight than we'll have time for. So there are some busy slides there that we'll just skim through. And if you're interested, if that's an area that you'd like a little more info on, you can go in and have a look at the slides. We've also got a little a download in there for you too, a navigation data sheet that you can laminate and pop under your bungees when you're on the water. So that's what we're here for. And session 3, the natural phenomena session. A reminder that we've got one more to go on the 8th of November, not Melbourne Cup Day, to cover navigating from the cockpit, where we bring all the theoretical elements together and imagine you in your boat, the land around you, how you navigate safely to your destination. Saturday, the 19th of November, we're planning a practical day on water to let you put theory to practice with some coaching. And we'll have more information about that later on. Those of you who've been here for the long haul, we've got a couple of slides here just refreshing what we covered in the first webinar on the tools of the trade, as we called it. I won't go through all that. It's in the slides if you want to review that stuff. The second webinar was maps and charts. We covered a bunch of stuff. And remember, both those sessions are recorded and are on the Paddle Australia or Paddle New South Wales page. So tonight, it's natural phenomena. And there's an image of someone who didn't get their planning right, finds themselves with quite a long carry for the wood in. So we'll be talking about weather and wind, tides and currents, wave and swell, and a little at the end on all visibility. As I mentioned, there's quite a lot to cover here, so we're going to skim through some of this fairly quickly. There's really a lot there. So weather and wind. Now, wind is what we're usually looking for when we're looking at a marine forecast, but there's other factors there that we need to take into account too when we're planning. Thunderstorms, rainfall, visibility, they all matter for safety and comfort. The thing to keep in mind with weather, it's a complex system in the sense of complex adaptive systems. So from a common set of start conditions, the weather can evolve in many different directions. So even with the BOM's fabulous computers, their forecasts break down over 3 or 4 days. Beyond that, they can't forecast reliably. So you hear about gurus doing long-range forecasting. Long-range forecasts are about the drivers of the weather, not the actual weather, giving you indications of what will shape the weather, not what the weather will be. So if you're planning a trip somewhere, your best guide is to look at weather records. Have a look at the prevailing winds at the time of year you're thinking of paddling, rainfall, temperatures, all that kind of stuff is available for you to give you an indication of the probability of the kind of weather you're likely to get as you think about your plan. One of the most useful of these things is a wind rose, it's called, where they aggregate direction strength of wind to give you a sense of the likelihood of particular conditions. We've got a bunch of them in the slide there for different places: Super Island, Sydney, Townsville, and I'm sure this is really hard to see on your monitors, but if you have a look at the slide later, you'll get a better indication of what they are. Do some Googling and look at the wind rose to your coastal area that you normally paddle in, and see for yourself how reliable it is in measuring the likelihood of particular conditions.
It's just pipe in, if I may.
Yes,
looking at Townsville Narrow, you can see that the aggregation of data commenced in 1940, and on this particular example, ends in 2016. So there's a lot of history there. So the point is that the longer the history, I think the more reliable the information is going to be. So just on this, from a long-term planning point of view, looking at that scale up there, you can see on that Townsville windows that easterly wind. It's at that time of the year. I'll have to come down a little bit and see where it was taken. It's September. Okay, it's a September example. You can see that easterly wind is one of the most persistent, and also that time of year it has its potential to reach its highest strength, highest speed. So for long-term planning, you'd think, okay, maybe September is not a good time for me to go paddling in that particular area if I want to avoid wind.
So one thing that isn't wind that's going to worry you in your forecasts is thunderstorms. We don't talk about these enough, I don't think. The hazards that attach to thunderstorms: strong winds, heavy rain that will affect your visibility, hail, and the most worrying of all is lightning. So the cumulonimbus clouds, thunderstorm clouds, have very strong vertical movements of wind. At the surface, that manifests into gusts from downdrafts and microbursts that can exceed 65 knots over a short period. So that's really not something you want to be around. But the lightning is going to kill you sooner than the strong winds. If you can hear thunder, you are in danger of being struck by lightning, and you don't want it on the water. So as the storm approaches, then the threat increases. So if you are trying to reach shore, monitor flash to bang time. So from between lightning and hearing the thunder, it's about 3 seconds at lighter, and that will give you an indication of how far away the storm cell is. But you really want to be off the water, because there you are in your kayak, and you're probably holding a carbon fiber lightning conductor that's wet as you try and reach shore. You really don't want to be there. If you are too far out to regain the shore, and you're in a group, spread out so that you've got the ability to provide mutual support if someone does get struck. Put your paddle on deck and try and minimize your contact with the kayak. Just bum heels until you need to grab that paddle and brace in 65 knot winds. But this is a theoretical approach to thunderstorms, but trying to minimize your contact area in case lightning does strike in your vicinity. Even ashore, you're still not safe. You need to try not to be the highest thing in the vicinity, and try and get yourself 100 meters away from shore, and don't be the highest thing around. So if you can get under a group of trees that are all of course highest, or into a ravine, something like that, into your car is even better. If your car happens to get the pull out, get inside, windows up, close the doors, don't touch metal objects. Your car is a Faraday cage, and lightning will pass over the outside down to the ground. If you are caught out and you get a sense, and those people who have been struck by lightning, so there is a sense of they see their hair stand on end and take taste in their mouth. The trick is to minimise your contact with ground. Most fatalities occur from the ground current, not from a strike. So you want to minimise your contact and shorten your posture. So crouch down, feet on the ground, hands over ears, the usual routine, pray, and hopefully you'll survive a strike in your vicinity. So that's thunderstorm. We'll get that out of the way. Not a nice place to be. If the forecast gives you a high probability 30%, something like that, of thunderstorms when you're thinking about paddling, I'd not go. These really are something you don't want to be in the vicinity of. Okay, so yeah.
There are apps available with storm tracks in them. So some people might find them useful. I've not used them, but I know that they are available to give an idea of where the storm is in relation to where you are. So probably not a bad resource to have.
The bomb's rain radars will have a 512 kilometre scale, which will give you good visibility. I was flying the day the big thunderstorm struck Canberra and demolished large chunks of the city, and you can have that on your iPad and your kneeboard and see how you're going with relation to thunderstorms. But remember, if you can hear thunder, you can be struck, and the danger period extends until 30 minutes after the thunder stops. So now we're in wind, which is the day-to-day thing we think about before we go paddling. So what we're going to aim to give you this evening is the ability to understand what wind does to your kayaking activity, how it affects your endurance and your speed, your comfort and safety. We want to make sure you can understand how landforms get in the way of wind, how fetch matters in terms of the subsequent sea state you'll get for a particular strength of wind. So you want to get forecast before you get on the water and have a plan for how you're going to get off the water if things go bad. A bunch of resources here. If you open the slide set, they're all active links that you can follow and get to some of these applications. The images on the right-hand side of the slide are the bombs weather apps available for your phone. Left-hand image there showing you what a rain radar looks like on your phone. It is the kind of thing you can use to track a storm cell.
Just on that right-hand image, which is basically what you're going to get out of Meta as well on your computer. You get out of the wind speed, you see there in kilometres per hour. You can just toggle on that and it will convert it to knots. It's sitting there in 3-hour windows. Just toggle on that on the kilometres per hour or click on, and it'll just convert it to knots. Some marine forecasts, as we know, wind speeds are given in knots.
So the bombs apps, and Meta is a bomb site within the site, are what I use most of the time. They're really good. Predict Wind, though, is one that lets you select the modelling that the system is using to forecast. And I find that quite helpful at times. And we've heard from my mate, Mark Sun, that it seems to be the most accurate of all the weather apps in Bass Strait. There's a really good 3 or 4 page PDF on the bomb site. The link is there on the slide. Weather guide for marine outdoor adventure activities. It's a really good summary of what you need to know about, particularly wind, but weather as well. And a bunch of places, many of the same places are available for observations as well. It's helpful to know what the prevailing conditions are in your area. So in southeast Australia, we understand that there are winter westerlies with northeasterlies in summer. We get southerly buses at various times of the year. If you paddle in Queensland, southeast trade winds that blow very predictably in the southern hemisphere winter, and cyclones in the southern hemisphere summer, in the wet season. And that's what a forecast, marine forecast, looks like on the bomb's site. And on the app, you can drill down into those forecast areas as well. So the bomb divides the New South Wales, well, the Australian coast, into sections, and let you go in there and get a nice synopsis of weather in the preamble, and a 3 or 4 day forecast of likely wind strength for you, so you can plan your trip. For the next webinar in November, we've got a passage planning exercise for you, where we'll have you looking at forecasts and deciding put in times, put out times based on your weather forecast. It helps you understand forecast if you know where wind comes from. So wind flows from high pressure regions to low pressure, and the steeper the pressure gradient, the stronger the wind. And winds circulate around pressure centres. In the southern hemisphere, that's anti-clockwise and outwards around high pressures, and inwards and clockwise around low pressures. So I was taught in my Navy days a rule of thumb, right-hand rule. So thumbs up, high pressure. So we're pointing up for high pressure. Your fingers curl anti-clockwise, and that's the way the wind circulates around high. High pressures are good news, fair weather, light winds. Low pressures are bad news, thumbs down. Your fingers now curl clockwise. That's the direction of circulation around a low. Bad weather, strong winds. So there's a windy image of Australia with the sea level forecast weather map that lets you see how that's actually working. So the low pressure in the Great Australian Plate, you can see that's quite an intense low, 993, contours are very close, and we've got a very strong clockwise circulation around that low. Around highs, it's a compound high, but the principle's the same. On the Queensland board there, thumbs up, we've got there, as you can see, an anti-clockwise circulation, dispersed pressure gradients, so quite light winds around that high. Okay, so it's helpful to sort of keep that in mind when you're looking at a forecast. And there are local effects. So that's how it kind of moves on continents, but we also get local effects. So during the day, the land heats up and produces a local low pressure that draws in a sea breeze off a cool sea. At night, it's reversed. So land cools faster and pushes land breeze out over a warmer sea. image C is the one, if you're going in mountainous areas for your country where you've got high ground inland, you get a thing called katabatic winds, which are downslope winds, where you get local cooling of wind, of an air mass that's really dense, and then gravity takes over and drives it down the slope. And you get very strong winds with katabatic wind. And they have names for the region where you suffer from them. Santa Ana in California, the Fern in Europe, the Chinook and the Squamish in Canada, all working with this katabatic principle, where gravity is contributing to the strength of the wind. You get the reverse in summer as well, where heat in the mountains sucks the winds in. Anabatic upslope winds are a feature in Howe Sound in British Columbia, where I've been paddling. Local knowledge told me don't get a fjord when the anabatic winds are blowing, because you won't get a pull out. You'll end up at the head of the sound, because that's the way the wind at 25 knots is going to be taking you. Again, very predictable. It's the kite surfing capital of the world, Howe Sound and Squamish at the head of Howe Sound. So why do we worry about wind? So it influences our speed, our endurance, and our ability to keep heading. Our stability is also affected by sea state, the wave height that the wind generates. So that sea state is going to depend on wind speed, wind duration, how long it's been blowing, and the fetch. How much water is it blowing over? Because the waves will compound the long fetch. And a snip from Berger's Fundamentals of Kayak Navigation, graphing the way headwinds and tailwinds affect your paddling speed. They mentioned paddle fatigue as well. Even though it looks, a 25 knot tailwind looks pretty benign, my paddler fatigue would be going off the bloody clock at that point. 25 knots with a bit of fetch is going to give you quite a messy state. If you're into surfing the runners, you'll be fine. I struggle in those conditions. But that's an indication. As the wind rises, it's going to slow you down. It's going to make, and we're paddling into it, it's going to make it harder to paddle. So you're going to get tired sooner. So you've got to think about this when you're planning the trip. Adrian, I'm sensing this is an opportunity for you to come in and talk about paddler fatigue. With the whole issue of headwinds.
Oh, well, obviously, I'm going to slow you down and frustrate you, of course, which is a double whammy. So, I think we, the hairy-chested paddlers might say, "Oh, yeah, I can paddle effectively in a 25 knot headwind." I know I can't, and I wouldn't be going out if I was faced with a day where I'd have 25 knot headwinds for a fair bit of the paddle. Tailwind, 25 knot tailwind, yeah, terrific, like it, lovely, but that also presents some challenges. You know, your boat might not be as stable as you'd like it to be, but yeah, if you want an adrenaline rush, a good downwind 25, 30 knot wind will give it to you.
This is what the surf skiers love, you know, the long downwind runs. I find it really challenging.
And you'll find some particularly local sea kayak designs are the later ones. A lot of them are in fact designed to take advantage of runners, you know, following seas. My analogy is nowhere near as fast or as nowhere near as fast as these new designs, bows, etc. and different shaped hulls, flatter hulls, but into the wind, it's a much better performer.
Yeah. So the way we refer to wind strength is a thing called the Beaufort scale. I didn't mention it earlier, but when you're reading a forecast, the winds can actually be up to 40% stronger than the forecast wind. That's just the nature of forecasts. So when you see a Beaufort reading of force 5, which is 17. Now, I know you can't see on this slide. We're going to go to a bigger font size in a moment, so you can see what the different scales mean in terms of wind on the water. But this is how the warnings work too. So strong wind warning is a Beaufort scale 6 to 7, force 6 to 7. Force 7 is 28 to 33 knots, but remember you can be getting gusts up to 40% above the top of that range, above the 33 knots. Storm force 10 to 11, hurricane force above 64 knots. You better hope your boat's tied down behind something pretty substantial. I haven't been at sea in a hurricane force wind, he said confidently. Actually, I have, sorry, and it wasn't nice. But I have been, I recall a storm force wind which just blew the sea flat. It didn't allow a sea to build. The wind was so strong. It was extraordinary. Anyway, showing it to you in a way that hopefully you can see on your screen. So we've only got 3 to 7 there, which is kind of the range that we're talking about with paddling. 4, 6, 4, 7, most paddlers are off the water by then. And force 1, force 2, we barely notice it. Or I think, Adrian, you were saying force 2, you can start to feel it on your face.
Yeah.
But we're pretty happy force 3 to force 5. Life is starting to get more difficult for beginners in force 5. So this is giving you a sense of where your personal limits are in terms of paddling. And we've got an explanation there of what it feels like when you're on the water in those conditions. It's the kind of thing you need to practice. So when you're out on the water, make an estimate. Note it down with a china graph on your deck, your waterproof notebook if you're using one of those, and then check when you get back. Find observations for the area you're paddling in and see how accurate your estimates were. It is as well that you can see when the forecast is wrong because you're getting wind strengths above what the forecast was. So that's
been here about how I use these observations. And how I advise new paddlers, novices, to use them for benchmarking. So they go out for a paddle and they think they're out in a 10-knot wind and they're handling it quite nicely. Come back and see, okay, I was out there between 11 and 12 near Port Denison. So I just checked the automatic weather station at Port Denison and see what the winds were. Oh, okay, the winds were actually 15 knots. Oh, okay, well, I was comfortable there. So next time I look at a forecast and it's forecasting a 15-knot wind, well, I can go out in it. I know I've done it. So it's a good way of benchmarking your level of confidence or comfort with winds. I do it for just about every paddle I do for various reasons. For instance, paddling at Lane Cove on Wednesday nights in the time trial, if I've done a slow time, which is increasingly the case, I'll try and find a reason. And one of them is quite often that I'm paddling into a strong headwind at some stage of the time trial. Same thing applies to tide flow as well. But that automatic weather station, great resource. The data.
Thanks, Adrian. We had a couple of slides in the slide deck giving you force 1 to force 8, what the waves look like, and they've disappeared. But I'll put them back in when we finish the session today, so that they'll be available there if you want to go in and check them. So now we're going to move on to tides and currents. So there's a bit of theory here to get over, so we understand what we're talking about when we're talking about tide and tidal streams. So tide is what happens vertically. That's the rise and fall of the water level, and tidal streams, or it's also called tidal current and tidal flow, is the horizontal movement of water that allows levels to rise. A current, an ocean current, is moving water, but it's unrelated to the tide cycle. An east current is something that could well affect your paddling plans. And we'll talk about current a little more later. So just a theory, what causes tides? So they're caused by gravity, by the relative position of the sun and the moon. Now, we kind of learned this in primary school. I've got a couple of animations coming up that hopefully will just refresh for you. So the lunar component, so the effect of the moon's movement is about twice the size of the solar component. The moon is much smaller than the sun, but it's much closer. So when the sun and the moon's gravitational forces are aligned, so at full moon and new moon, we get our largest range of tides, our spring tides. When they're at right angles, so in the first quarter and third quarter of the moon's phases, we get nips, because those gravitational forces are no longer in alignment. Now, of course, the Earth moves around its axis. It has an orbit that isn't perfectly circular, elliptical. The moon moves north and south in their declination, their latitude, and those effects also influence tide heights. But in its simplest form, new moon and full moon, it's springs. First quarter, third quarter, it's neaps. So those gravitational forces cause the ocean to bulge, and the Earth spins within that bulge. So that's the way to visualize it. If we lived in water world, we'd have regular semi-diurnal tides. That is 2 highs and 2 lows in 24 hours. But we don't. So we get the effects of the water moving in the basin that gives us all of these varying patterns of tides. Some places like the Northwest Shelf, we have a diurnal tide there, 1 high and 1 low per day. Up in South Wales, it's semi-diurnal with diurnal characteristics. So we get highs of different heights in each day and lows of different heights. So a couple of animations just to connect this for you. So here's our individual revolving in water world. So we've got the bulge of the oceans, and as the Earth spins within that bulge, we experience high waters and low waters. So semi-diurnal, 2 highs and 2 lows per day. Here's thinking about the moon and the sun. So aligned, we get springs. At right angles, we get neaps. and so on through the cycle. Some additional stuff we need to know. So our our springs range is going to be larger than our neaps range. And look, there's a bunch of extra stuff in there for you on the slides, which we don't need to cover. We've glossed across all of that already. Just reminding us that tide tables are predictions based on the astronomical situation that will prevail out through our epoch. And it assumes average meteorological conditions. Okay, about 10, 13 millibars. But onshore winds and lower than normal air pressure will give you a higher tide than forecast. And offshore winds and high pressures will give you lower tides than forecast. Storm surges will give much higher levels. And in bays and estuaries where you've got freshwater inflows after heavy rain, you're going to have much stronger ebbs. You're going to have slack water occurring before high water. So the tide will still be making while water is flowing out. So we do need to treat with caution our tidal predictions. There's some really good stuff on the BOM site there. There's a link in the slide to give you lots more information about this stuff. So that's what the tide tables look like, giving us, in this case, Newcastle, the tide times and heights for the week. Have a look at some of those examples down the bottom. Shoot Harbour, a range of 2.5 metres. That's quite a lot until you think about Broome, which has a range of nearly 8 metres, and the Bay of Fundy in Canada, nearly 11 metres of tidal movement. So Northwest Gulf, you're going to have a lot of excitement paddling there because you're going to be getting tidal streams above 8 knots. The heights of tide and the flows basically follow a sine wave. And if you want to be able to estimate intermediate heights, the simplest thing is to draw a sine curve and plot the times of high water and low water and the heights. Now, if you don't have time to do that, we've got 3 mental models for you that you can use to get estimates of heights and flows, knowing the times of high water and the range. Now, the sine curve works off the coast of New South Wales. It doesn't work in some parts of the world. In the English Channel around the Solent, you might get 3 successive high waters and then a low. So because of the shape of the basin the water is moving in, you don't get regular tides, but we do. So we're lucky. So in the folder, and I'll paste a link in a moment in the chat line, we've given you a sine curve that on navigation data sheet that you can use to draw the tide of the day, so you know what the heights will be throughout your paddle. And here are 3 rules. Now we're going to just go through this fairly quickly. If you've been around paddling for a while, you've heard about these before, so this should be just revision for a number of you. The rule of 12ths gives a height. So assumes that the rise or fall is about 6 hours, and that in each of those hours, we can approximate the sine curve. So in the first hour of the rise, it's 1/12, second hour, 2/12, third hour, 3/12, and in reverse down to the next slack water. So that's the rule of 12ths. Now, I've got this table in that navigation data sheet in the resources in the folder, so you can download that and put it. The 50/90 rule gives us the speed of the tidal stream on the hour. So slack water at the turn of the tide, well, we assume it's the turn of the tide. It often isn't because of local effects. So you need to know when slack water is. It may not be high water or low water, but from the time of slack water, 1 hour later, the tidal stream will be half its maximum strength. 2 hours later, it'll be 90% of its maximum strength. 3 hours later, it's 100%, then 90, then 50, then you're on the next slack water. Okay, so that's speed on the hour. So that's handy to know if you're entering a narrow channel, passing between two islands, and you'd like to know the speed of the stream. That gives you a quick way of estimating it on the hour. The rule of thirds gives us the distance we'll be displaced over the whole hour of the flow. So the first hour of the flow, it's 1/3 a rate, 2/3 for the second hour, 3/3 for the third and fourth hours, then 2/3, then 1/3. So why don't we try? Here's an opportunity for you to do some thinking work. So it's now, we're camped at Patonga, and we're watching a webinar on our iPad in our tent, and we're going to go paddling tomorrow. We're planning to put in at 8 a.m. So rule of 12, what's the high tide going to be at 8 a.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, 12th October? So the tide table's there on the side. The full moon symbol under the Monday tells us what? Springs. So we can expect we're going to have stronger tidal streams when we get out into the water around Pittwater, Cowan Creek, because we're at sun and the moon in line, stronger tidal streams. Okay, so Wednesday, we can see we've got our 419 low water, 1041 high water, 8 a.m. what we think the height will be. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it.
It's a good, we're heading up the Hawkes River on this paddle.
Yes, it'd be nice to be traveling with the last of the flood before that it starts with all this heavy rain. The Hawkesbury would be fairly ringing out there today. So the range of the day using the rule of thirds is 1.35 meters. So that's the difference between 0.30 and 1.65. So we divide that by 12, and that gives us our 12ths of the rise of 0.11 meters. 6 hours and 22 minutes is the duration of the rise. That's near enough to 6. So we want a tide 2 hours and 40 minutes, so 2 2/3 before high water tide. Okay, so that's 1/12 for the last hour, 2/12 for the hour before that, and then 1 or 2/12, that is 40 minutes worth of the third hour before high water. So the tide rise to come 5/12, 0.55 of a meter. So we subtract that from 1.65, about 1.1. We don't really need to work in too many decimal points. These are all quick estimates, but just over a meter will do us. In fact, if we have a look at, we forgot forget the rule of 12ths for a moment and just look at the numbers here. 7:30 is about half the time between 4:20 and 10:40. So we know that the height halfway, if our total rise is 1.35, then we've got 0.67 on top of our low, giving us nearly 1 metre, and that's going to rise 3/12 in the next hour, so 1.5 twelfths in the next half hour. So that gives us about the same answer, just using simple arithmetic. Okay, rule of 12ths. So when we don't have timetables, where else are we going to get information about our tidal flows? We've got tide diamonds on charts. If you paddled around Port Stephens, just off Nelson Bay, where the ebb really rips, there's a tide diamond there that will give you the strength just off the breakwater there. And in the parts of the chart, you'll see arrows. If the arrow has a feather, it means the flood stream. So F, feather, fetch, fletch, sorry, flood. No arrows, no feathers rather on the arrow, it's the ebb stream. So we'll see that on our chart as well, telling us what the maximum flow is. So sometimes you'll get an EAPS range and a springs range. Sometimes you'll get just one range, one rate rather, which will be the springs rate. Now, Adrian was keen to talk to this slide.
Thanks, Russ. Okay, this is probably can't pick it up on this slide, but there's a tidal diamond there, B, which relates to the example Russ had on the previous slide, which indicates that 2 hours into the flood, the rate is around about 3.1 knots at springs. This position of this tidal diamond is of interest to people doing bass strait crossings. Clark Island in top of the picture, and the mainland has made down the bottom. Little Muzzle Road Bay, just up in the bottom left-hand corner, is a common point for bass strait crossings to either finish more commonly or start, which was the case when I did it. This is Bank Strait, part of Bass Strait, and the route that a lot of kayaks take is from Spike Bay up there on the top of Clark Island on the left-hand side, Spike Cove, I should say. That's Russ, yeah, that's it. And down to Little Muzzle Road. As you can see, if you do a straight line between the 2 points, you're going past that tidal diamond. So you can, depending on when you're doing it, you get a pretty idea of just how you're going to be affected. It's a planning thing. Perhaps you want to plan your trip. Can't always do it this way, but plan a trip when you're going past that position of the B diamond, when it's close to slack water, perhaps, or maybe looking at the complexity of what's happening down the bottom with those other little islands, Swan Island and so forth. You might like to go, well, and you see, Russ, you can maybe just pick up there that they're saying it's a 3-knot flow through that area. So a fair bit of planning. One of the things what you don't want to be doing is being pushed over, doing a crossing from Spike Cove to Little Muzzle Road, or going back the other way and getting pushed over to the east, because it takes you towards the complexity of the Moriarty banks. Which, if you get an opportunity to look at the slide in more detail, you'll see it's a very complex area, lots of breaking waves, overfalls, and so forth. So you certainly don't want to find yourself being pushed over towards that area. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Adrian. So when we're doing our calculations of the total stream, again, we just need to check the rate of the day. So look at the range from the standard port that we're using for our tidal streams and compare the springs rate and the neaps rate with the range of the day, with what we're actually getting. So if you're halfway between neaps and springs, you're going to get half of the movement between neaps and springs. So it's 3 knots at springs, and at 2 knots at neaps. It's going to be 2.5 knots at halfway between the two. If there's only a springs rate quoted, then that's as strong as it's going to be. So life can only get better than that. But your neaps rate is going to be somewhere between 5/8 and 3/4 of the springs rate, depending on the ranges. So the trick is look at the flow. Have a look at movement of water past butts at anchor or buoys, so you get an estimate of the actual strength. For those of you interested, I've actually plotted out the 50-90 rule for speed with a tide diamond in Port Stephens, that off Nelson Bay there we were talking about earlier. And you can see that the 50-90 rule connects pretty well to that sign of that the tide diamond gives you of tidal strength. So it's a pretty good approximation. Fort Denison is the mother superior of tides on the New South Wales coast. A really bad metaphor, sorry. But it's actually quite hard to get a readout on what the springs and neaps ranges are. So I've popped on the slide there the different levels for Fort Denison. So highest astronomical tide, that's the highest tide that the sun and the moon will dictate. When everything is aligned, it's just over 2 meters. Lowest astronomical tide is tiny, 0.044. So that's pretty much as low as it will go in normal atmospheric conditions. And mean sea level about 1 meter. So Fort Denison actually records water levels, and you can get access to that through the Bomb Tide site and actually see how the actual levels have deviated from the predictions.
Russ, we just stay with highest astronomical tides, lowest astronomical tides. How often are they established?
It's the 20-year, 23 years, I think, is the. So after 23 years, they recalculate and generate a new set of numbers. As you remember from episode 1 or 2, lowest astronomical tide is what we use as chart data in Australia. So you've always got at least that much water under the keel, because in standard meteorological conditions. Abnormal, so low pressures, it could go higher, high pressures, it could go lower, offshore winds higher, offshore wind lower. A lot of places, smaller ports on the coast will have, they'll refer back the shape of the curve for a standard port and give you time and height differences. So you can shift your sine curve to match the circumstances in your actual location. And all of that data is in the tide area of the bomb's site. Thing to think about as a paddler. Sorry,
Russ, just coming on that, those top predictions. Weather will give you more specific locations. And so, for instance, you're going to do the Hawke's Classic this year. You want to know what the tide situation is at Windsor and how it changes in between Windsor when you get to finish at Brooklyn. Any idea on how we weather establishes that information? Do they do it from tidal stations, or because there's probably on the Hawkesbury River, Willie will probably give half a dozen options in between, or maybe fewer, between Windsor and the finish at Brooklyn.
Yeah, the Australian national timetables are intended for mariners who are offshore, essentially, and entering kinds of ports that large ships go into. The state government will have much more detailed tidal data for all kinds of users. So I don't know with whether the case, but what's normally the case is that they'll be drawing on state government tidal observations, and we're basing it on that. That would be my guess.
They don't use
They don't use
algorithms.
Sorry?
Algorithms.
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so, unless they're doing an averaging between known points. You know, if they've got Australian national tidal data for the head of the river and mouth of the river, and they just do a simple averaging algorithm. That's also possible. But I expect that the state, Maritime New South Wales, or whatever they're called now, will have that more detailed tidal data.
I think Manly MHL has, Manly Hydraulics Laboratory has some limited information. I know for the Lane River, for instance, they have a tidal station at Fuller's Bridge.
And Manly Hydraulics Laboratories are a New South Wales government entity, so that fits pretty well. So thinking as a paddler, so the tides are great, we calculate the tidal stream. What's really going to worry us is what's the wind doing with relation to the tidal stream. So wind against tide is going to give you your roughest sea state. Wind with the tide is going to be smoother. So that's something to think about when you're doing your passage planning. And the shape of the land is also going to influence the way tidal streams are accelerated as they go either over shallows, creating overfalls and eddies and rips, or around headlands. So we've got shoals in Port Stephens, the mouth there, and I'm not sure you can see it in the image, but we can see overfalls and races starting to form there over shallows. And that's what you'd see on your chart. The thing for overfalls and tide races. Great about paddling in British Columbia off northern Vancouver Island, where you get spectacular depth changes and strong currents. You get some fantastic races there to play in. And Red Headland, as we said, the stream will increase in strength as it bends around the headland. And again, you can see races off Barrenjoey in this image if you squint. There's the same kind of effect occurring. And if you've got that acceleration of the stream and an onshore wind, so the ebbs flow around Barrenjoey like crazy, and you've got 15 knots easterly starting to blow, that's really going to cause the waves to stand up there. I think you've got a story, Adrian, of that experience in Bass Strait. With I've forgotten which point they were rounding. This,
okay, well,
Adrian, was it? Campbell, right?
Campbell had an incident going around Cape Barren Island, around a headland, Cape Franklin on the other island, the Flinders, can be a problem. It's not just the water, it's the wind as well. You know, again, that combination of opposing forces, we're going one way, tidal flow going the other, going around a protrusion like a cape, then you can expect, if you're pretty close in, you can expect to be pretty bumpy, pretty challenging, and there have been incidences with people going around that particular point on Cape Barren Island have come to grief and gone over. So the chart will show you where the overfalls are and so forth. So yeah, these needs to be approached cautiously. Planning needs to be pretty thorough. Just said, anywhere where you've got intrusion of land, for instance, on Pittwater there, there've been quite a few stories of around the Flint Steel Beach and so forth. This down on, well, you know, just show where West Head is, those Russ, come around Flint Steel Beach to the northwest. Around that area there can get very, very gnarly with an ebb tide and wind opposing.
Yeah. Here's what you're familiar with, Adrian.
Yeah, you talked about slack water earlier, and I guess a lot of you already know about this. The importance of local knowledge. This is the channel into Wallace Lake that separates Foster on the south, Tuncurry on the north. In my early days as a leader, I put on a trip to paddle from a place called Lisbon, about 25 kilometres south, along the coast and into the channel, and come down Wallace Lake, about a kilometre from where we put in the end of the paddle. So it was an overnight thing. Checked it out the day before, supposedly low tide, and the water was ripping out of there. 3 knots at least, I'd say, it was really ripping out what was meant to be low tide. Anyway, local knowledge tells us that at that particular point, and any sort of similar situation up and down the coast, maybe Swansea, where you've got that big body of water in Lake Macquarie coming through this channel at Swansea, you're probably going to find there's fair delay between the change of the tide and slack water. So local knowledge, I see with Marty Vanderpoel, he would have paddled this channel at the channel in Swansea. You got any comment make on that, Marty?
Yeah, actually, fun enough, when they when put the second bridge in, it didn't make a difference up there. There was original Swansea Bridge years ago, about 20 years ago, they put a second bridge in. I remember at the time, divers were saying that actually the second bridge slowed the tide down by about an hour. They seem to think it is just because that other bridge built on the side of the whole cycle just moved back a little bit. But yeah, no, it can be a bit notorious trying to get through there, and it looks just like about two break walls running out. If you try and get in Swansea and run outside with the northeasterly line, can be a bit fun.
I had in channel at Foster in the early days. First time I ever done it, I paddled from the beach and down the lake, a day paddle. Knew bugger all about what was happening. Arrived at the wrong time. I was in the wrong place, the wrong time going that channel, I was on a standing wave. I didn't know what was happening, but fortunately it was green. It was a green wave, but I was paddling like very. I think I was surfing a wave. I was going nowhere. So yeah, that's local knowledge up and down the coast. People have come to grief. I know down at Buey, the bar at Turos, where local knowledge, they had the local knowledge, they would have avoided a lot of grief.
So we're getting short of time, so I'm going to whiz through a couple more of these. Ocean currents, remember these are not influenced by the tides. The BOM has a fantastic ocean currents site that you can go to and get predictions and observations of the current situation. I'm showing C there, but there are other things that you also display, including temperature, which if you're planning to swim, could be handy. So if you're planning an offshore paddle, have a look at ocean current, see what the East Australia current in particular is doing. So now we're just going to quickly go through swell. So wind waves, we understand. So fetch, duration of the wind, that's going to blow or create a wave that propagates downwind. Swell comes from distant weather situations. They're forecast for you in your marine forecasts. So swell, there's a bunch of things to think about, but when we're talking swell, so here we can see what happens when a swell reaches shallow water, where if you like, the bottom gets cut off the wave and it stands up and starts to break. So we describe swell, the three main indicators are height. So that's the distance from peak trough, and the higher the swell, the greater the distance, the more energy is in that swell. Direction tells us the direction it's propagating from. So an easterly swell will travel west. It'll come in through heads in Sydney Harbour. Period might not seem obvious, but that's the most important marker of energy in a swell. So the longer period is the time between successive peaks, the more power is in that swell, and the bigger the waves when it reaches shallow water. So if you've got 11 second swell, that's powerful. There is a lot of energy in that swell. 8 seconds or more is moderate swell. And because they're generated by distant weather patterns, you may get more than one swell. We can then they can influence each other, and you get larger waves every now and again where one swell builds on another. When you're thinking about a beach landing, so tide height is going to affect it, swell height and period, and direction will all affect the conditions for a beach landing. The contours also matter. So a steep gradient, like we see in this image here, is going to be much more challenging in terms of wave height and surge, rather than a long gentle gradient where the waves break quite a long way out. Do you have anything more to talk about that, Adrian?
Well, only that in my terms of sea kayaking, goes back quite a few years, this area on the slide, the environment talking about surging wave, steep beach, is one of the most dangerous areas. It's within the Sea Kayak Club, it's the area where most injuries have occurred. Trying to land a fully laden kayak and get it out and manage it on your own in conditions you see there is very, very difficult. Unless you're Schwarzenegger or something like that. But for an aging sea kayaker, I want to be anywhere near that.
So winds and waves, you can get forecast information, that kind of stuff, and that will give you the compound effect of multiple conditions. So sea state and swell, and multiple swells. Manly Hydrologics Laboratory, we mentioned, have very good data on swell, and it's well worth consulting them before you start a trip. And we can get swell forecasts. Similarly, when we're planning a passage, we need to be thinking about this kind of thing before we head out onto the water. The BOM has a table there which will give you combined wave height. So when you add sea and swell together. Now, just to round up a little bit on visibility. Now, visibility can be affected on the curve of the Earth. Will mean we don't see stuff from our low light of eye at 5 or 6 kilometres away. Fog, darkness at night, and heavy rain can all affect our ability to see our surroundings. Now, I'm by training a mariner. If you can't see, you can't be seen. So another warning in there, you're only going to be invisible on other ships' radar. So if you're in an area that's heavily trafficked, you really want to think carefully before you go out if the visibility is poor. It's a calculation you've got to make. Is it safe to proceed in conditions of reduced visibility? Ships will be increasing their lookouts, but a kayak is a very small thing. There's no radar paint. So it is very difficult for them to see you in time to take action. So with that caveat in mind, some things we can do are plan short legs so that we keep a distance between objects we can see, keep those short. Handrail, keep the green bit started. So follow a coast or a line of buoys or something like that. So you're ensuring that you're in sight of the land. If you're making a crossing to a feature of the coast, where there's good visibility or bad visibility, aim off. So when you reach the coast, you know which way to reach your destination. And choose a big target if you can. So poor visibility is when we really need a deck compass, a course steer, so that we can hold heading without having to rely on visual cues. So all the things we've talked about, wind and weather, the problems of sea, tidal streams, currents, and swell, we have to think about, we might be happy to manage each of these things on their own. We've got to think about when the holes in the Swiss cheese all line up and we face compounding problems from these things. We've got to think about that during our patch plan so that we're giving ourselves some strategies that can let us respond when the unexpected happens. I'm astonished. We've got there, and we still have some time for questions. I didn't mention at the beginning, we did ask you to save your questions till the end, or to pop them into the chat line, which it's clear you've done because we didn't get any interruptions as we went through. I've reposted the link to the folder for the slide set if you want any more detail there, and I'll upload those images of the different sea states, put those into the slide deck. But we have time for questions.
So just make a comment if I may.
Please.
what we've got in the way of resources nowadays, there's no excuse, I think, for you getting caught out in difficult conditions or conditions beyond those you can manage. I think back to the early navigators like the Portuguese and the Spanish and so forth. They had nothing like the resources that we've got nowadays. So you've got to take your hats off to them, because some of their achievements are just absolutely astonishing. Yeah, with all the resources we've got, no reason why, in my mind, you should find yourself in a situation that's beyond your ability to manage. Here ended the lesson.
Thanks. So, any questions?
No questions. Just wondering whether to unmute anyone, whether you want to type the questions in the chat. The timing was great. All the information, fantastic.
Yeah.
Nope. You must have covered everything very well, Russ.
I must have. So, just to punish people then, I'm going to come back. So here are the images that I've just popped into the slide set. Let me just bring those up. So these were to illustrate the Beaufort scale of wind strength. So force 1, glassy calm; force 2, light ripple on surface; force 3, we're starting to see slightly a few more ripples. We're starting to see the occasional white cap emerge. Force 4, we're still pretty comfortable. White caps are more frequent. Now we're on the wrong side of the curve. So as the strength increases, force 5, top left; force 6, bottom left. We want to be off the water by now. Force 7, top right. Notice we're heading downwind rather, because upwind is probably just too difficult. And force 8, it's survival paddling, seek shelter.
Russ, I've got a question for you. Sorry.
Yep.
Can you take a question?
Yeah.
So our land forecast from the BOM, wind speeds are given in kilometres per hour. Our marine forecasts, wind speeds are given in knots. What is the impact on the wind speed when it meets the sea? It comes over land and meets the sea. It intensifies, does it not? And do you have any idea as to what degree?
Well, there is no friction, or there is less friction between the moving air and the sea compared to the land. So when you think of the column of air moving, the air at 500 feet is probably hardly affected by friction at all. So the column reaches the sea, and that retarding effect on the lower layers is no longer apparent. So what we're seeing is a more uniform distribution of velocity in the air column, without that local the local effect of the land, the friction effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the column of air is moving at a uniform speed, but at the sea level, we're not getting the retardation that you get with friction on land from just the shape of the land, trees.
And another question, if you don't mind. Automatic weather stations like North Head are elevated, and you'll get their readings every 10 minutes, archived every half hour for 72 hours. And then you've got weather stations on Port Denison, for instance, or the Sydney Harbour one on that West Channel marker near Chowder Bay. The difference in the height of the weather stations. Is there any thing significant there in terms of, say, the higher the weather station, the stronger the wind is likely to be?
As a general rule, yes, that's right. And again, it's something that you think about when you're selecting the observation you want to look at, depending on where you're going to be paddling. So pick the one in Sydney Harbour rather than the observatory site, up on a hill. So that makes sense. Yeah, to do that. The other thing is, if you're going to be paddling on the coast, you want to be looking at a weather station that's on the coast, not at Bankstown Airport or somewhere inland, where again the land effects are going to have an influence.
And what about wind shear on the water? Is there any sort of change once the wind hits the water? Is there any sort of change in direction of the wind?
Yes, but it's not really apparent. The discussion we were having the other day about wind funneling around headlands, you do get a bit of that. So the way the air moves, and this is where being a pilot really helps. It changes throughout the column to sort of, unless you're breathing oxygen, you're limited to 10,000 feet. But from sea level to 10,000 feet, you're going to have different wind strengths and directions throughout that column. And as you go higher, by and large, the winds increase. So we're just looking at a small layer of that at sea level, but it's a very dynamic system.
I don't know whether it's apocryphal, but I've heard of sailmakers for these maxi yachts factoring in that the direction and the speed of the wind at the top of the mast is different to what it is down at the boom. That's it's quite possible. There are other things going on there though, with heel and the relative movement of the boat to the wind, because it's not tracking in the direction of its keel. So there's a whole bunch of complex fluid dynamics. If Margie was here, she'd love to talk about that stuff. That's her specialty. But yeah, throughout the column of air, the directions move and shift. It's a problem with sea level forecasts. So when we look at a weather map, it's the conditions at sea level, not at 10,000 feet. So or 20,000 or 30,000 feet. So the bomb can do that. The bomb can look at all those layers of wind directions and strengths and moisture content and all of that stuff. So I still tend to use aviation forecasts as well as marine forecasts, because I know that there are more resources being devoted to that. And I'll look at the forecasts for airfields close to the coast. Maru is a great one. And have a look at what the TAF is there. And that will be a more accurate reflection of wind at the surface than perhaps the marine forecast will be. So there's lots of resources out there, that's for sure. We have just 2 more slides. And we're on time now. Let me just bring those up and as we round up.
and I'll come back to the group in a moment if there are any more questions. But we wanted to just give you the things to remember from this webinar. And I'm not going to repeat them, but they're on the slide. If you do review them or you dip into the recording, we got on one slide there the things that we think you should recall from today's session. And reminder that our final webinar is on the 8th of November. That's not Melbourne update we deduced earlier, where we'll talk about putting all the theory together and navigating the cockpit, leading to a practical sea day on the 19th of November. And we are yet to decide where that'll be. Adrian, do you want to talk about the practical day?
Well, only that the location is going to be determined by who signs up for the day. We want to make it as convenient as possible for the bulk of the attendees in terms of location. Obviously, conditions, forecast conditions are going to have some bearing as well, but nowhere further north than Broken Bay, nowhere further south than Port Hacking.
So those of you in Wagga and the Blue Mountains will negotiate. It was something at the last webinar. We had people in Hobart and country New South Wales, really all over the place. So it'll be tough, I think, finding a centre of gravity for the group. Anyway, so we're a moment over time, but if there are any more questions, I've popped my email address into the chat line too. If you have a question after the event, don't hesitate to drop me a line. We had a couple of people take me up on that recently, so happy to do it. And that's my disposable email address in case you're an Optus subscriber and it gets spilled. No questions? I think we're done.
You've covered everything really well then, I think. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Pleased we got through.
Adrian.
Thanks again, Russ and Adrian.
Pleasure.
Thank
Cheers,
you for your
Marty.
contribution, Marty.
Yeah, thanks very much, Russ and Adrian. Cheers.
Awesome.
Good
Pleasure.
night.
See you soon.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pause the recording now.